Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Shells and Shadows. Today, I have a special guest with me, Nick Shaw. Nick, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Let's start off. Why don't you tell the world who is Nick Shaw?
It's a great question. I feel like it changes every day. I am a 26-year-old. I'm a full-time consultant. That's what I do. My 9 to 5, my day job. I work for a Big Four firm. I'm originally from Atlanta. That's home for me, but moved out to Colorado about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And yeah, I've been trying to branch out here in Boulder and meet some interesting people and continue to kind of push my limits. I feel like this is a place that attracts people who are very authentic and go down a lot of rabbit holes in like their personal hobbies, skiing or races or different things like that. So yeah, I'm a person that likes to push their limits and kind of see what I'm made of, work hard, all those different types of things. So
it's great. And Boulder's a very active place, one of the healthiest cities in America.
Yeah.
So you and I have spoken, and you run ultra marathons,
Mm-hmm.
pushing yourself to that limit. What has running an ultra marathons taught you about your own mental fortitude and strength, and how can other people kind of learn from that?
It's a great question. I don't think anybody starts out wanting to run an ultra marathon. I think for me, what it was during COVID, I needed to find a way to get out of the house. And for me, that was running. And it was just a mile or two here and there. And then for me, I'm very results oriented, outcome oriented. And so I was really drawn to run a half marathon. That was like the thing that I was like, man, I don't know if I could ever run 13 miles continuously. Signed up for it, ran it with a few friends, crushed it, had a great time, learned a lot about myself. And then I was like, okay, what's next? What's the next thing? And that was signing up for a marathon. And so I ran a few marathons, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. I'm loving who I'm becoming through the process. And then I moved out to Colorado, and there's nature everywhere. There's beautiful trails everywhere. And so I signed up for a 50-mile ultra marathon last summer out in Leadville. And Leadville is the highest town in the U.S. So that's like the big draw to it, is that it's 10,000 feet. The course goes from 10,000 to 12,000, back down, back up. And so there's something, I don't know, there's like an itch inside of me that like I want to see how far I can push myself. And I don't know if I hit that during the 50-mile race. So we'll see what I end up doing in the future. But yeah, I think that it goes back to this theme of like pushing your limits, seeing how far and how much you're capable of, and continuing to prove yourself wrong because you have a lot of self-imposed limitations. I know I did, at least growing up. There's always these caps that I had for myself, and running was just one conduit to push through those.
Yeah, and I feel like when we push through some physical barrier, whether we think we can or not, it can give us the strength that we need to push through other emotional or just like life barriers.
Right.
I remember I hiked my first 14er with my friend Jesse a few summers back, and it was the hardest thing I've done in my life. I'd never pushed myself quite the way I'd been involved in physical activity and fitness and whatnot, but this was a different beast to conquer.
Yeah.
It almost feels like in those mythical stories you slay the dragon, and part of that journey of self, and you go and you conquer whatever this is, whether it's an ultra marathon or a 14er, and then you come back into life and the smaller struggles don't seem as big because you've just conquered something great.
Right. Yeah. I think the hardest part about the 14ers is like there's no air up there, and you're not used to the like how your body reacts to being in that like low concentration of oxygen. But yeah, I think it's really important. And I think the physical aspect of pushing your limits, and whether it be whatever, it could be lifting, it could be skiing, it could be whatever. I think the physical aspect is where a lot of people start the process for self-development, but ultimately I think a lot of the improvements happen emotionally, mentally, in relationships, etc. But I think the physical thing is like the easiest thing to begin. And so that's what I recommend to people whenever they're like, hey man, I'm not in a great spot, or I'm going through difficult times. It's like, okay, well, go to the gym or go start running or do something for yourself, to where you instill that confidence within yourself. And then that confidence will flourish into a lot of different aspects and areas of your life.
So when you're coaching people and you have them start with that, conquering a physical task, pushing themselves to their limit in that way, how do you help them translate that into the other areas of their life, like emotion, work, relationships, like the daily life struggles?
Yeah. Well, I think pushing yourself physically really makes you more mentally tough, and it gives you the confidence so that you're able to start to master tricky things as men, like emotions or relationships or things like that. So I think you gain the tools mentally to be able to conquer the things physically, and then you go into okay, I can run a marathon, but if I can't regulate my emotions, or I can't communicate my emotions to my loved ones, am I really that healthy? So I think it's just kind of like a natural byproduct of the physical process.
It is, and that's also something that we're just beginning to scratch the surface with as men in our world today, because 50 years ago, men wouldn't show emotions. We wouldn't have these conversations like this, and it'd kind of just keep it buried. Yeah. You go to work, you raise a family, you do what you got to do, you man up. But if you're harboring emotions and harboring, shadows, and the topic of this podcast is shells and shadows. If you're hiding within a shell and you're refusing to face your own shadow, how can you really excel in all those other areas? You really can't. You have to be a well-rounded individual.
Right. Yeah. I think if we're just now starting to understand that, and like you mentioned, like previous generations never had this sort of authenticity with their emotions. I don't know, how you were raised, but I was certainly raised to keep my emotions. If you're a masculine man, you keep your emotions in check. But I find as I'm starting to grow up that the most masculine and the most integrated man is the one that is able to really understand their emotions, sit with their emotions, and then have that be a source for good, as opposed to a source for addiction or whatever, ailments that we see in the modern man.
And if you don't have that intentional outlet, whatever that is for you, you can see how it goes into the shadows, it gets hidden, and it comes out in those negative ways. That's how, cycles of abuse, for example, are perpetuated. Yeah. If these things aren't addressed, if you don't face them, they carry on in generations and generations of families.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, it sounds like you're doing some great work with your coaching. So you're 26 now,
Yeah.
And you finished school and you've gone out into the world and you've created this coaching business for yourself, and you've been helping other people.
Yeah.
How would you direct someone who's maybe my age, looking for that direction, looking for the next step after college? They've lived their whole life in the academic system, and now they're being told, either join the workforce or do the alternative and take a leap of faith and make a name for yourself in another way. How would you direct them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I've really struggled with. I was always pushed down the traditional path. For context, was really close to going to medical school after graduating. And then, I just realized that it wasn't for me, that path was laid out for me by somebody else, by my parents, by, who I thought other people wanted me to be. And I had that reckoning after working with a coach. And so I think as a coach, the most important thing that you can do is provide your clients or the people that you work with as much clarity as possible, right? Clarity meaning understanding, okay, what do I want to get out of this life? If I'm looking back on my life from my deathbed, I'm 80 years old, what are the different buckets of time allocation, right? So did I spend time with my family? Did I spend time doing things that I love? Or did I spend time doing things that were draining and didn't necessarily contribute to my purpose? And so I'd never really done that. I'd never really like envisioned the end of my life and then tried to bucket the time that I spent throughout that well-lived life. So that was a really helpful practice. I also think like emotional regulation too was like really important that I learned through coaching. Like I never really was that in touch with my emotions. I wanted to feel the highs. I wanted to feel the positive things, the success, the 4.0 GPA, the promotion at work, but I didn't want to like feel the negative emotions. And that's like you're a perfectionist. You only want to feel the good things, but you don't want to, do the work and get through the hard times. You always want to be on. You always want to, or care about your appearance and care about how other people are perceiving you. So yeah, there's tons of tools that you can use through coaching, and that's why like I really recommend it for people that are having difficult times. Whether it be work-wise, relationship-wise. Yeah, there's a lot of people that feel like they're like running at like 60 or 70% and aren't close to that like 90 or 100%.
Sure. I like what you said. You touched on the idea of perfection. There's a quote I like: perfection is the enemy of good. And perfection in our eyes is something that is free and rid of the bad, of the negative, of the painful, when in reality, it's those moments that can really define us when we're at our lowest and we embrace it, and it can make us more whole human beings when we use them and we see them as almost a seed that we can plant and nurture into great fruit and great strength. And those moments create the strong human beings that we become in the future. Yet in the moment, it's like, I don't want this. I don't want to see this. This is ruining my image of what I think is perfect.
Yeah.
And if we would just in fact focus on being, I guess, middle ground, good enough men who strive and do their best, we can create good. Perfection is something that I struggle with. It's very much an illusion because when you have that narrow lens of self and narrow lens of the world, you are reluctant to, express yourself and put out whatever it is you have to offer.
Yeah.
You say, well, if it's not 100%, it's not worth giving.
Yeah.
Even if you're giving your 80%, someone's going to see that and someone's going to recognize that, and it could help them in any possible way. It's great that we have this great studio around us, and we're fortunate to have it. But even just typing up a simple message and posting it online of strength, of inspiration, that's enough. It may not be the state-of-the-art technology that we're in right now, but it's good enough.
Right. Yeah, there's I think the thing that people can focus on is progress over perfection, like progressing past the previous version of yourself, as opposed to, because if you're striving for this perfect ideal of who you want to be in this world, you're never going to hit it, and you're constantly going to be let down. And so, there's a quote, I think it's by Aristotle. It's like, there's no greater, I'm going to butcher this, but it's like, there's no greater, I'm blanking on it, but it's like, essentially you just want to be better than your previous self. Okay. Right? Like you want to push past who you were. You don't want to compare yourself to other people. And so, I try and strive to live by that.
You probably try and instill that into the people that you coach and you mentor and whatnot.
Yeah. I think one thing more on perfectionism, I think we're just raised in this society that breeds perfectionists. I think the school system breeds perfectionism, because everything is outcome oriented. It's all based on, I get positive feedback because I got good grades, on my report card. I got all A's. Oh, great. I get to get ice cream with my family, after the semester's over. And that just continues to compound. That continues to compound. You graduate with a better GPA, and then you get into a better school, and then you get a better job. And it's this constant need of like trying to one up and trying to, meet these ideals that you're never going to be good enough for. And so I think a lot of people, they might be successful early on, but then when they don't get the promotion, don't get the dream job that they wanted, their sense of self is so closely tied to that external outcome, as opposed to knowing who they are internally, that they lose their sense of self. They crash and burn if they don't get the job. And I think it's really important to begin to cultivate your sense of self internally as opposed to your external achievements.
Yeah, and that whole system of report cards to GPA to, whatever it may be in the academic system, it ends once you graduate college. And you may go on to, do post-grad and whatnot, but once that's over, it's ending. And it's very much an extrinsic system of validation.
Yeah.
Where, again, like our own self-worth is tied up in what we can produce. And we should produce good things, and we should strive to, learn and do our best in school. But when we're so tied up in it, we forget that we need to be intrinsically validated by our own existence.
Right.
And that's a quote. Someone shared it with me, actually. I forget who it was, but it stuck with me. And it's like a mantra. I am intrinsically justified by my own existence.
Yeah.
And so the fact that I'm here and I'm alive means I have purpose, means that there's some reason for me to be here. Right. And then all the other fluff and nonsense just can fade away.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we, as a society, we do a good enough job at showing that to our young people, like to our kids, and really instilling in them that they have a purpose just for being here. They're not what they do for work, or the results, which I'm guilty of, like being a really results oriented person. And so I think that's why this idea was so mind blowing to me when I figured it out. Like I was doing all these things for the validation that it would provide once I completed it, as opposed to because it's really calling me and it's why I'm put on this planet.
So I want to get a little bit more real and raw and understand who Nick is.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Again, the title of the podcast, Shells and Shadows. We've all had those moments in our life when we have been running and running and running from ourselves, and there's a changing moment where everything just breaks open and we're faced to look at our inner shadow. And ultimately, if we listen to that part of ourselves that just wants to be whole, we can use that, like I said, as a seed for our own growth and nurture it. Sometimes we shy away from it, but when we look at it and we face it, it's usually for the better. Do you have a moment like that? Would you mind sharing what it took to face that part of yourself that maybe you didn't want to, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I got out of a relationship about 7 or 8 months ago with a girl who I thought I was, going to settle down with, I was going to start a family with. And I realized after the strong emotions, the wave of like sleepless nights and why did this happen? I realized that I was looking for validation from her that I couldn't give myself. And I was so fixated on the relationship working out that I realized I lost a lot of myself through the process. And that was a difficult pill to swallow, like understanding why this happens, why I can't provide myself the love that I was providing to somebody else. And so, yeah, that wasn't easy to like go down that few months or years of like understanding and asking myself the questions like, why did I put so much into this relationship? Why am I feeling like as distraught as I am for this ending. And I realized that it's like unfair to put that onto her. You know, that's like, that's totally unfair. And there was a sense of like anxious attachment style, you know, avoidant attachment style. And so I went down a really deep rabbit hole of like my childhood and what might have happened throughout my childhood for it to lead me to being an anxiously attached person and wanting that constant validation from her. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that I'm like slowly becoming more of a secure attachment style type of person for my, you know, future relationship that I get into.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I have a few follow-ups to that. First of all, I think it's incredibly powerful for people to hear your story, because we can talk about ideas and concepts and philosophies all day long, but at the end of the day, people see themselves in other people's stories. And when we share stories, we break down the barriers between us as human beings.
Right.
And so even you just sharing that, I find things that I resonate with, and I'm sure a lot of other young men and women especially do too. Because there's some young man watching this that's probably going through the same thing.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting also that in relationships, especially romantic relationships, it can dig up so much shit that we had forgotten about, especially childhood stuff.
Yeah.
It's like we're giving ourselves over to this person in such a deep and profound way, and it's scary. It's very scary. And that anxious attachment, wherever that comes in, it can bring up so many, you know, memories of how we first learned to love and interact with family.
Right.
Because we have our friends, we have our guy friends, we go through our daily life, and then a woman comes around and we're asked, are you willing to, you know, share a part of your heart with this person? It's not something we've been asked to do with a new person in a long time. Mm-hmm. I think it really challenges us, and like I said, digs up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I initially, when I was going through all these like emotions and feelings and asking myself why, it was really uncomfortable. And like, I didn't want to go through it, because I thought, why is my childhood, who I was as a little kid, like, why is that impacting me? 25, 26, I have my ducks in a row, you know, my ego was so high, you know, I was like, why am I reliant on what happened to me as a kid? Why can't I like push through that? But yeah, it was an interesting time. And like, I think we constantly need to be learning about ourselves and our childhood, so that we can show up for ourselves and show up for others.
Yeah, and it's in doing that inner work that we best serve others around us.
Right.
No one benefits from shoving more skeletons away into the closet, refusing to, you know, kind of dig things up and work through them.
Right.
In a way, you know, in working with other people, and I'm sure you can relate to this, and having these conversations, for me at least, it's beneficial to others who may be listening, but it also helps me in that process. Yeah. I'm sure you learn a lot from your clients. Mm-hmm. There's a saying, and I'm also going to butcher it, but it's a Jewish saying. Mm-hmm. It says, "From my teachers, I learned a lot. From my books, I learned more. And from my students, I learned the most." And it's very powerful, because we can learn and we can absorb information, but it's in really taking it upon ourselves to teach concepts and share ideas with other people and help other people. Yeah. We learn a lot ourselves. We learn a lot from the people that we're, you know, trying to help and trying to learn with.
Right. Yeah. This is kind of like a side story, but in college, I was a grad assistant, meaning that I used to help teach an anatomy course for 28 kids. I was like a year older than them. I don't know why they ever listened to me or like how I got into that position. But I remember I learned so much more teaching it to the students in that anatomy lab than I would have ever learned self-studying, because suddenly it's not about you. Suddenly it's about, okay, I got to help these kids learn the concepts and get into medical school and get into dental school. You know, like I'm responsible for, at least partially, for how well they interpret this information. And so I think there's a bigger theme there about like making it less about you and making it more about the service you can be to others, to where that helps you grow and mature a lot more and a lot faster.
Totally get that. I'm also teaching a course right now. Nice. And it's crazy. I have to study the information itself and like the text that we read, because if I don't know it, how am I supposed to relay it out to others? I have to really meditate upon it and internalize it. And in doing that, I understand it better.
Right.
But you've taken yourself out of the picture at that point. You're kind of a vessel, like a medium for whatever the information is. There's information and it needs to get to these kids. It needs to get to these students in some way. And you're the way by which that happens. And that's a beautiful process.
Do you feel like you do that with Judaism? Like, do you feel like you're kind of like a vessel for other people and sharing your story, you know, like, yeah.
Yeah, I do. And when I'm at my best, I do. When I am really seeing the people around me and I'm trying to understand what they may need. And if I can offer a perspective that they may not have, something that I gained from my own life experience, then whatever that experience was, it was worthwhile because I was able to share it in some shape or form with other people.
Yeah.
And in Judaism specifically, like I said, the course I'm teaching right now is a course about the like soul level suffering, how we feel extremely lonely in life sometimes, and what Judaism provides as a solution. And very deep and profound texts, stuff that I've felt myself, but in sharing it with others, I almost take myself out of the picture. And I can, be nullified in that way where, you're just, it's going right through you.
Yeah.
It's like a dissolving of the ego almost.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good question. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh man, do you have any other questions for me? Do you have anything else that you want to share?
Yeah. I'm curious, I guess, for you, like what's the origin story for this concept of the podcast? And, why do you feel uniquely positioned to share this with other people?
So that's a great question. I actually started what I thought would become what Shells and Shadows is now when I was 17. I started a coaching business during COVID called Momentum Mentoring. And it was based off of the premise of mind, body, and spirit. And I developed kind of a curriculum for each of those areas to help other young teenage guys just kind of looking for who they are in that crazy time that it is to be 13, 14, 15, etc.
Right.
And it took a while, and I went to college, and it kind of fell away. It was always a dream of mine, but I said, okay, I'm just going to go study psychology. I'm going to go get my degree. I'm going to go get a job. And at some point, I saw my time in college coming to an end, and this big moment of transition. I thought to myself, what do I want to do? What the hell do I want to do? And I remembered this dream that I'd kind of let fade away 5 years ago at this point. And with the help of, my dear friend Yovel and my dad too, who's been a huge mentor to me, I've been able to muster up the courage to start speaking again start putting some of this message out there. And I've learned a lot more since I was 17, but almost like reigniting a dream that I feel like I had lost at one point feels very full circle for me.
Nice. Well, it gives your story that much more depth because you've gone through the whole process of starting it, you know, albeit you were a teenager, like starting something that you're really passionate about and then watching it fade away and then suddenly coming back to it. It seems like you're able to give a lot more perspective to people who, you know, might not start a podcast, but might be interested in starting another business or moving to a new town or something like that. Like anything that requires courage and putting yourself out there. I find that the people that have done it need to be sharing their story, because if you can just impact like one person, that provides so much fulfillment and so much, like, it makes everything worth it.
It does. And again, the power of story sharing. Hearing your story, you know, you being 4 years older than me and having this whole coaching business helps me. Me sharing it may help, you know, an 18, 19-year-old who's kind of looking for themselves in the world right now.
Right.
And so another reason I decided to do this is because I felt like a slave to perfectionism and felt like when the time is right, I'll start speaking and sharing things and putting out writing. I've been journaling since I was 16, and I have like 10, 12, 15 or so journals filled with poetry and writing and reflections. And I said, when the time is right, I'll start using my words and expressing it.
Yeah.
The time is now.
Yeah.
There's no later.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's always going to be a better time to be doing it and another later time when everything will be just right.
Right.
But it's an illusion. It doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's like if you let it get to that point to where the time is right, it's too late. You know, it's too late. Yeah, that's really powerful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So you felt like the time was right for you to start a coaching business at one point, and you went ahead and did it. How was that process of choosing to start?
Yeah. Well, I think originally it just started with me like starting an Instagram, you know, and like beginning to document the process of like, okay, I want to share with other people what running an ultramarathon is like, or what training for a jiu-jitsu competition is like. And then I think like the progression there was, it was also like, I want to start this coaching business, but I'm not ready yet. I haven't suffered enough yet. I haven't like put in my time, if you will. But yeah, then things start to happen in your life, and it's like the writing is on the wall. Like for me right now, with the new like administration coming in, that's changing a lot of things for my work, for like what I do full time as a consultant. And so all these things started happening, and I almost took it as like an external cue that like, hey man, you really got to buckle down on like what you want to do, because you know, the writing's on the wall. Like this, I'm getting like energy from the universe. It's telling me, you know, like, hey, like now's the time. And you can only prolong that for so long. And I feel like the people that don't listen to those calls are the most unhappy, because they never had the courage to actually do what they wanted to do, as opposed to, you know, okay, I'm never going to be ready. There's a great, he's a Stanford professor. His name's Graham Weaver. He's got a talk on Spotify called How Do You Live Your Life at Full, it's like something like that, like how to live your life at full force or something like that. And he's like, every time a student comes into my office and they tell me that they want to do something, I say, what's stopping you? And they're like, oh, it's not yet. It's never like, I'm never going to do it. It's not yet. I have to collect all the pebbles and, you know, I have to be ready. And that time never happens. So
that reminds me also of something that I read in a book called The Creative Act by, I think, Rick Rubin.
It's a great book.
Great book.
Yeah. And
ideas and creative inspiration that we may have, it's not entirely from us. We're all interconnected in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. And when a spark of creativity emerges into the ether, into the cloud, let's call it,
Yeah.
it's going to be received by someone no matter what. The question is, are you the person that's able and open to receive it at that time?
Right.
And draw it down and bring it into physical form. So someone has an idea for a new business. It's this mind-blowing, burst of creativity that they have. They didn't just come up with that themselves. They were open to accepting that idea that maybe came into their imagination, and they took it on. They took it as their own, and they put it into very much a physical form, and they act upon it.
Right.
If it's not you, someone else will do it.
Yeah.
Someone else will catch that spark of creativity. So the time is always now, because that's when we receive those creative inputs, so to say.
Yeah. And I find, just to add to that, like the thing that people are lacking is not the ideas that come, right? Because people get ideas all the time. It's the courage to act on it. Like, it's the second step. It's like, okay, I get this great idea when I'm on a hike, or when I'm surrounded by nature, or surrounded by great people. But it's the courage to like actually do the thing, the second order effect, that I think like a lot of people that like get scared of. There's a lot of fear around that. So yeah, that's a great book though.
It's a great book. Highly recommend it to anyone who's listening and is looking for any creative inspiration.
Yeah. I think one more thing to add about that book is, and this goes to like anybody who has anything where they're putting themselves out there, the podcast, Instagram, social media, whatever. I struggled with this a few years ago, but I was always doing things for the likes, or for the views, or for the external factors. But Rick says that like you should be doing things because it's what you feel on the inside needs to be shared in whatever mode that is. If that's a painting, that might be your calling, or it might be a poem like you mentioned, but you can't do it for anybody else. You can't do it for the algorithm. You can't do it for any of these other things besides the fact that it fills the void, the creative void that you have within you, that you feel like it needs to be shared with the world. And that really blew my mind, because I had realized how much I was doing things for the views, or for the likes, or for the followers, or whatever. And that's a dangerous place to be.
But that's expected. I mean, especially when you're working on a platform that is driven by that validation system of likes and views and whatnot, you almost have to defy that whole entire system of validation and say, no, I'm going to resist. I'm going to do this and make this act an end in and of itself.
Right.
Just the fact that you're doing whatever you're doing, creating whatever you're creating, that act alone is worth everything.
Right.
It's something that I'm sure that you've had to conquer.
I'm probably still conquering it. I think we all are. I don't think
we all.
Yeah. But it's just an interesting behemoth to wrap your mind around these algorithms and things that like are so powerful. And I feel like the thing that's missing is the authenticity and humanity in it all. So
you mentioned something a little bit earlier about how changes in our world have impacted the ways that you've directed your coaching. Specifically, we have a new change in administration, just stuff going on. How do you, try to phrase this the right way, how do you alter your approach to coaching as the world shifts in new directions?
That's a great question. I think it's another callback to something that I learned when that relationship ended. I'd wanted to, and I feel like you learn in the Disney movies that like I wanted to control everything. I wanted to like hold on to the things that I thought were for me, as opposed to letting life and almost kind of like flowing down the river, as opposed to swimming up the river and not going with the flow. And so I think Yeah, just going back to being a perfectionist and wanting to be in control and wanting to feel like anything I did, I was the one that had the sovereignty over the decisions that I was making. But then you realize like that's not the case. Like life is going to have its way with you. It's just how you adapt, and your flexibility and your ability to pivot and not take things personally. And so yeah, I think that applies to any coaching client. Like if you're having trouble with something, you want some sort of control over it, as opposed to letting life kind of naturally flow, and seeing where life takes you and being open to those sorts of experiences.
Yeah. And in openness without resistance, we best adapt.
Yeah.
So I think that's very much at the core of everything we've talked about today. Nick, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your lived experience in particular with the world. Like I said, stories are how we connect to one another and removes any barriers or shells that we may put up around us, because just for that one young man who heard your story of heartbreak, or your story of finding your place and your purpose, taking that action, drawing down that creativity, that's worth everything. So appreciate you, brother. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I feel like it's really important to put yourself out there. And even like we said, if one person benefits, like it's a success.
Amazing.
Yeah. And that person could be myself, honestly. Like
me too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.